Imagine you're standing in a cave. It's cold. It's somewhere in the mountains of what will one day be called Iraq, but right now it has no name, because nobody has invented names for places yet. Nobody has invented writing. Nobody has invented farming, or cities, or the wheel. A fire burns near the entrance, and on the ground in front of you, someone is dead. Someone you knew. Someone from your group. And here's the strange thing. The thing that has never once happened before in the entire history of life on this planet. You don't walk away. Every other animal walks away. A wolf doesn't bury another wolf. A deer doesn't hold a funeral. When something dies in nature, the body is left where it falls, and the world simply moves on. But you do something different. You dig. You arrange the body carefully, curled up, almost like it's sleeping, and then you place things beside it. Maybe some tools, maybe some food, maybe, if the most famous version of this story is true, flowers. You are burying your dead as if they are going somewhere, as if this isn't the end, as if there's a somewhere to go. That's it. That's the moment. That is the oldest evidence we have of the single most powerful idea our species ever produced. The idea that there is something more than this, something beyond the body on the ground, something we would eventually start calling God. And here's the part that should stop you cold. That cave is real. Its name is Shanidar, and the burial inside it is somewhere around 70,000 years old. 70,000 years. Let that sit for a second. The pyramids are about 4,500 years old. Jesus, Muhammad, the Buddha, every founder of every religion you've ever heard of lived within the last 2,500 years, which on this timescale is basically this morning. Writing itself is around 5,000 years old. The people at Shanidar were burying their dead with apparent care and intention more than 60,000 years before anyone wrote down a single word about a single god. And it gets stranger, because the people at Shanidar weren't even us. They were Neanderthals, a completely different human species, which means the instinct to treat death as a doorway instead of a dead end might be older than Homo sapiens itself. It might not be a human invention at all. It might be something we inherited. Now, I have to be honest with you, because the real story is always more interesting than the myth. That famous flower burial, the one where pollen in the grave suggested someone laid flowers on the body, is debated. Some researchers think the pollen was dragged in by burrowing rodents or bees, not grieving mourners. But here's what isn't debated. Bodies were deliberately placed there. And once you start looking at other sites, the evidence piles up and refuses to go away. In caves across the Middle East, archaeologists keep finding bodies buried with red ochre, a deep red pigment, sprinkled over the dead more than 100,000 years ago. You don't decorate a corpse you think is just meat. Deep inside a cave in France called Bruniquel, Neanderthals built mysterious rings out of snapped-off stalagmites, hundreds of meters from the entrance, in total darkness, around 176,000 years ago. Nobody knows what they were for. Nobody lives that deep in a cave. The leading guess is the one nobody can prove and nobody can shake. And in Russia, at a site called Sungir, 2 children were buried around 34,000 years ago, wearing more than 10,000 beads, each one carved by hand from mammoth-ivory. Experts estimate every single bead took close to an hour to make. Do the math on that. Thousands of hours of labor in the middle of an ice age, when every hour not spent hunting was an hour flirting with starvation, poured into decorating the bodies of dead children. You do not do that for nothing. You do that because you believe those children are still somehow someone, because you believe they have somewhere to be. But believing in an afterlife is one thing. Believing in an actual being, a god, a thing with a face that was never born and will never die, that leaves a different kind of fingerprint. And we found it. In a cave in Germany in 1939, archaeologists dug up hundreds of tiny fragments of mammoth ivory. It took decades to piece them back together. And when they finally did, they were holding the oldest god anyone has ever found. It's a figurine, about 30 centimeters tall. It has the body of a man and the head of a lion. It's roughly 40,000 years old. And it's a depiction of something that does not exist, has never existed. There is no lion man anywhere in nature. Someone, 40,000 years ago, sat in the dark and carved, with enormous patience, a being that lived only inside their own head. That's the moment imagination became mythology. That's a person looking at the world and deciding there are beings in it more powerful than us, beings that are part human and part beast and entirely invented. Every god in every religion that has ever existed, Every sky father, every earth mother, every spirit and saint and deity is, in a sense, a descendant of the moment somebody first imagined the lion man. For a long time, the story we told ourselves about religion went like this. First, humans settled down and invented farming, then villages, then cities. Then, once they had spare time and spare food lying around, they built temples and organized their gods. Religion was supposed to be the luxury that came after civilization had already been built. And then, in 1995, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt started seriously digging into a hill in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. And what he found shattered the timeline. Buried under that hill were massive stone pillars, some over 5 meters tall, weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in enormous rings, carved with foxes and snakes and scorpions and vultures. It was a temple, a deliberate, monumental, built-on-purpose place of worship, and it was around 11,500 years old. Older than pottery, older than writing, older than the wheel. And this is the part that rewrote the textbooks, older than farming. It was built by hunter-gatherers, people with stone tools, no metal, no domesticated animals, no agriculture. People we had quietly assumed were too primitive. They quarried 10-ton blocks of limestone, dragged them across the landscape, and stood them upright in the shape of worship, 6,000 years before the first pyramid stone was laid. And Schmidt proposed something genuinely radical. What if we'd had the whole thing backwards? What if civilization didn't create religion? What if religion created civilization? What if the desire to gather and build something sacred together is what forced scattered bands of hunters to settle down, to feed huge groups of workers, to invent farming in the first place, just to keep everyone fed long enough to finish the temple? First came the temple, Schmidt said, then the city. Maybe the very first thing we built when we stopped wandering wasn't a home. It was a house for the gods. And wherever we look, in every corner of the planet, the same thing keeps happening. Every human society ever discovered, every single one, with no confirmed exceptions, has had some form of belief in the supernatural. People separated by entire oceans, who never met, who shared no language and no common ancestor for tens of thousands of years, all independently arrived at gods, spirits, and afterlife, some moral order watching from somewhere above. That's not a coincidence you can just wave away. That's a pattern pointing back at something inside us. And scientists who study this think the human brain might simply be wired for it. We're pattern-finding machines. We see faces in clouds and hear meaning in thunder because for most of our history, assuming the rustle in the grass was a predator and not the wind is exactly what kept you alive. We're built to assume that when something happens, someone wanted it to. And we are the only animal on Earth that fully understands it is going to die. A piece of knowledge so unbearable that any mind capable of imagining a way around it had a very powerful reason to. Put those instincts together. Agency behind everything, meaning behind everything, and a desperate need for death not to be the end. And you get a creature almost guaranteed to invent the divine. Whether that means we invented God, or whether it means we were built with an antenna tuned to something that's genuinely out there. That is the oldest argument there is, and I'm not going to pretend a video can settle it. People far smarter than me have spent their entire lives on both sides of it. What we can say is what happened next. That quiet personal instinct, the one that made someone gently bury a friend, grew into something enormous. Belief got organized. The temple became the treasury. The priest became the most powerful person in the village, and then in the kingdom. Gods that began as comfort against death slowly became the justification for law, for kings, for war, and in places stretching from the Valley of Mexico to the cities of the ancient Near East, for sacrifice, sometimes human sacrifice, offered up to keep the harvest coming and the sky in line. The same impulse that raised Gobekli Tepe in apparent wonder also raised empires and burned heretics and launched holy wars that are still being fought today. One instinct, almost every possible outcome. But strip all of that away. The empires, the wars, the rituals, the institutions, and you're left standing in the cave again. Cold ground, a fire, a body curled up like it's only sleeping, and someone kneeling beside it who has decided against everything their own eyes are telling them that this is not goodbye. That's where it starts. Not in a temple, not in a holy book, not in a sermon, in a grave dug by hand by someone who simply could not accept that the person in front of them was gone. The need to believe there's something more is older than farming, older than language, older, maybe, than our species itself. We've been reaching past the edge of death for at least 70,000 years, and quite possibly far, far longer. We still don't know if anything is reaching back, but here's the thing that gets me every single time. We are the only creature on this planet that has ever looked at death and flatly refused to accept it as the answer. Every other animal takes the end for what it is. We're the one species that stood at the edge of the grave, stared straight down into it, and said, "No, there has to be more than this." We've been saying it for 70,000 years, and we still haven't stopped.